Sometimes I look back and wonder how I even did it. My life, for so many years, became this quiet, almost sacred devotion to Arthur. His illness just crept in, slowly at first. Then it consumed everything, demanding every ounce of my energy, every waking thought. I became his hands, his memory, his unwavering rock, sacrificing my own small pleasures and grand dreams without a second thought. It wasn't a burden, not really. It was just what we did, what I did, for the man I loved, the man who was my world. There were moments, of course, when the sheer exhaustion threatened to pull me under, but then I'd look at him, so vulnerable, and find another reserve of strength I didn't know I had. Our shared history. It was like a warm blanket I'd pull around myself on the coldest nights. I'd remember the spark in his eyes when we first met, the adventurous trips we took, the quiet evenings curled up with a book, simply enjoying each other's presence. Those memories were my anchors, the proof of a life truly lived, built hand in hand. Even as Arthur's body failed him, and the cruel reality of his prognosis loomed large, I clung to those beautiful recollections, finding a profound sense of purpose in my role as his caregiver. It wasn't just about prolonging his life. It was about honoring the incredible journey we'd shared, the promises we'd made, and the quiet understanding that had always bound us together. Our home, once filled with the lively sounds of a bustling life, now had a different kind of rhythm, a gentle hum of quiet care. Each measured dose of medicine, every carefully prepared meal, the gentle touch on his fevered brow, these were the silent acts of my unwavering commitment. Sure, the isolation could be profound, and sometimes a wave of weariness would wash over me, making my bones ache. But then I'd think about our future, the meticulous plans we'd made, the financial security we'd painstakingly built together, and it would spur me on. I truly believed all these sacrifices were worth it, laying a strong foundation for whatever was to come, a testament to our enduring partnership and the love that I thought was unbreakable. The air in the room just changed one afternoon, a subtle shift that I felt deep in my bones. Arthur's breathing, which had been so labored for so long, softened, almost imperceptibly. I was right there beside him, holding his hand, tracing the lines on his face, whispering every loving word I could think of. It was peaceful, truly, as if he simply drifted off to sleep, and I found a strange, grim comfort in knowing I was with him to the very end. My promise, my vow, had been kept, fulfilled in those last quiet moments. The days that followed were a blur of hushed voices and soft footsteps. Friends and family, they truly rallied around me, their hugs and kind words a much-needed balm for my raw grief. The funeral, though painful, was a beautiful tribute to Arthur's life, and I felt a quiet sense of closure knowing I'd honored him. Amidst the sorrow, a tiny flicker of anticipation began to stir within me. A new chapter, difficult but mine, was finally beginning. I just knew that all the hard work we'd put in, the life we'd built together, would now be mine to navigate, our shared assets securing my future. Looking back, I remember a few times in those final days, Arthur seemed a little distant, more withdrawn than usual, perhaps. But I just chalked it up to the illness, the pain, the sheer exhaustion of it all. Who could blame him? I dismissed any nagging thoughts, focusing instead on his comfort, on being present for him. There was so much going on, so much to manage, and I honestly couldn't imagine anything else taking up his precious last thoughts. Now, with the funeral behind us, the next inevitable step was approaching, the reading of the will, a moment I believed would simply confirm what I already knew was rightfully ours. The lawyer's office felt strangely hushed, almost reverent as I sat there, my heart a mix of lingering grief and quiet anticipation. I expected a solemn formality, a confirmation of what I already knew, that Arthur and I, as partners in life and love, had built a future together, and now it was simply being made official. The air was thick with unspoken condolences, a respectful silence. But then, Mr. Henderson, with his crisp suit and even crisper voice, cleared his throat, and the words that followed hit me like a physical blow, each one a hammer strike against my already fragile composure. "According to Mr. Arthur's last will and testament," he began, his voice devoid of emotion, "all of his substantial assets, the family home, savings, investments, everything, are to be bequeathed to Ms. Sarah Jenkins." My breath hitched. Sarah? Who on earth was Sarah? The name hung in the air, a foreign, unwelcome sound that echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the room. I must have misheard, surely. My mind raced, searching for any Sarah I knew, any acquaintance, any distant relative. Nothing. The confusion was quickly overtaken by a searing wave of disbelief, then a cold, creeping horror. This couldn't be right. This simply wasn't possible. The pain that followed wasn't just grief. It was a profound, gut-wrenching betrayal, cutting deeper than Arthur's death itself. My world, already teetering on the brink, crumbled beneath my feet. Years of sacrifice, of unwavering care, of putting my own life on hold, flashed before my eyes, culminating in this unbearable injustice. The lawyer continued to speak, offering a few cryptic details about this Sarah, mentioning an address, a date, but his words blurred into an incomprehensible drone. All I could feel was the icy grip of treachery, the devastating realization that the man I had loved and cared for so deeply had harbored such an unimaginable secret, leaving me with nothing but shattered trust and a gaping void. The initial shock, the raw disbelief, slowly began to morph into a searing, cold anger. My grief for Arthur was still there, a dull ache, but it was now overshadowed by a burning need for answers. Who was Sarah? How could Arthur, the man I'd shared my life with, the man I'd selflessly cared for, have kept such a monumental secret? I felt a desperate urgency to peel back the layers of his deception, to understand the betrayal that had just shattered my entire world. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Every waking moment was consumed by this relentless, furious quest for the truth. I started digging, turning our familiar home into a crime scene, every corner a potential clue. Old papers, financial statements, even the dusty boxes in the attic. Nothing was sacred. I found a hidden compartment in his old desk, and inside, a small, worn leather-bound diary, not his usual organized planner. Flipping through it, my hands trembling, I discovered cryptic notes, dates, and then, unmistakably, Sarah's name, scrawled repeatedly, sometimes alongside travel itineraries and subtle financial discrepancies that now screamed out at me. The realization that this affair had been going on for years, right under my nose, twisted my gut into knots. How could I have been so blind? I even started discreetly reaching out to some mutual friends, subtly probing, watching their reactions, searching for any flicker of recognition or discomfort when I mentioned the will, or even just Arthur's later habits. A few conversations, seemingly innocent at the time, now replayed in my mind with sinister new meanings. The long absences, the vague excuses, the times he seemed just a little too busy, all the subtle signs I'd dismissed as illness-related or just Arthur being Arthur, suddenly coalesced into a horrifying picture of a carefully constructed double life. My shock was now replaced by a chilling, determined rage, solidifying my resolve to expose every single one of his lies, no matter how painful the truth might be. After weeks of relentless digging, the puzzle pieces finally clicked into place, forming a complete, ugly picture of Arthur's deceit. The anger I felt was still very much present, a simmering fire, but it was now tempered by a surprising clarity. I realized that confronting Sarah directly in a dramatic shouting match wouldn't serve me. I needed a different kind of vindication. My focus shifted from emotional outbursts to a more calculated approach, one that would expose the truth and reclaim my dignity without descending into chaos. I knew my fight wasn't just about money. It was about honoring the years I'd given, about proving that his betrayal wouldn't break me.
"We're restructuring the senior management tier," Damon said, not making eye contact as he shuffled papers on his desk. "Your position has been eliminated." I sat across from him, my hands folded neatly in my lap, the same position I'd maintained through thousands of meetings over my 32 years at Calridge Equity Partners. The heavy oak desk between us had been there since before my time. Damon had only been sitting behind it for 6 weeks. "I see," I replied, my voice steady despite the hammering in my chest. "May I ask about the timing? I'm scheduled to retire in less than 8 weeks." He finally looked up, his expression a practiced blend of regret and determination that didn't reach his eyes. At 38, Damon Shore was exactly the kind of CEO the board thought they needed. Young, aggressive, from one of those Silicon Valley firms that had been making headlines. "The restructuring timeline is non-negotiable," he said. "We need to implement these changes immediately to meet our quarterly projections. Human resources will handle your exit package." He glanced at his watch. "They're waiting for you now." I nodded, rising to my feet with the same composure I'd maintained through market crashes, hostile takeovers, and countless corporate storms over 3 decades. "Thank you for the opportunity to serve Calridge," I said, extending my hand. "I wish you and the firm continued success." Damon seemed momentarily thrown by my calm. He shook my hand briefly, already reaching for his phone. "Security will escort you to clear out your office." "My name is Harriet Vaughn, Senior Vice President of Operations at Calridge Equity Partners, or at least I was until about 15 minutes ago. I'm 64 years old, and I've devoted my entire professional life to building this firm from a regional investment office into a nationally respected financial institution." As I walked back to my office with the security guard trailing awkwardly behind me, I thought about the retirement party the team had been planning, the congratulatory emails that had already started arriving from clients and partners, the transition plan I'd spent months creating to ensure a seamless handoff, all of it meaningless now. Laura, my assistant for the past 12 years, was waiting by my office door, her eyes red. "I just heard," she whispered. "This is outrageous, Harriet." I squeezed her hand. "It's business, Laura, nothing personal." But as I began gathering my personal items under the watchful eye of security, I couldn't help but think about Thursday, tomorrow, and the standing golf game I'd had for 15 years with Charles Denham, president of Marion Bay Holdings, our largest investor, and Jeffrey Williams from Travanta Corp., and Eleanor Blackwood from Zentron Global. I wondered if Damon knew about those games, or what we discussed during them. Probably not. The security guard, Kevin, who I'd personally hired 7 years ago, looked mortified as he followed me to my car with a small box of belongings. 32 years at Calridge, and all I had to show for it was a box containing a few photos, a potted plant, and a coffee mug my grandson had painted. "I'm sorry about this, Mrs. Vaughn," he said quietly. "It doesn't seem right." "Don't worry about it, Kevin. You're just doing your job." I smiled at him as I placed the box in my trunk. "How's your daughter doing at university? Still pursuing engineering?" He looked surprised that I remembered. "Yes, ma'am. Made the dean's list last semester." "Wonderful. She'll go far." I closed the trunk and took one last look at the Calridge building, 15 stories of gleaming glass and steel in downtown Lexington that hadn't existed when I first joined the company. Back then, we'd operated out of 3 cramped rooms above a pharmacy. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Lexington, I felt oddly calm. The initial shock had worn off, leaving a hollow feeling in my chest that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. 32 years, and Damon hadn't even bothered to learn what I actually did for the company. My husband Thomas was waiting when I arrived home, alarm evident on his face. "You're home early. What's happened?" "I've been restructured," I said, setting my box down on the kitchen counter. "Effective immediately." "What? They can't do that. You've given them your entire career. You're retiring in 2 months." His face flushed with indignation as I explained what had happened. "It's done, Thomas," I said finally. "No point getting worked up about it now. You've built half their client relationships. You're the reason Marion Bay invested with them in the first place." He paced the kitchen. "Have you called Charles? He'll be furious when he finds out." I shook my head. "I haven't called anyone yet." I checked my watch. "But I do need to change. I've still got dinner with Eleanor tonight." Thomas stopped his pacing. "Eleanor Blackwood? From Zentren?" I nodded, already heading upstairs to change. "Are you going to tell her?" I paused on the stairs. "I'm not going to hide it, but I'm not going to complain either." That had always been my approach throughout my career. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make threats. I simply did my job with integrity and let my work speak for itself. It had served me well for over 3 decades, in a male-dominated industry where women of my generation were expected to serve coffee, not manage million-dollar portfolios. As I changed for dinner, I thought about my team, the people I'd mentored, promoted, and grown with over the years. I wondered what would happen to them under Damon's leadership. I wondered what would happen to the firm. Eleanor Blackwood was already seated when I arrived at Mercer's, the steakhouse where we'd been having our monthly dinners for nearly a decade. At 68, she remained one of the sharpest minds in investment banking, and under her leadership, Zentren Global had grown into a powerhouse that controlled over $12 billion in assets. "Harriet," she said, rising to embrace me. "You look troubled. What's happened?" I'd intended to ease into the news, perhaps even downplay it, but Eleanor had always been perceptive. As we settled in and ordered our usual drinks, bourbon for her, gin and tonic for me, I told her about my morning. "Calridge fired you?" She set her glass down with a sharp click. 2 months before your retirement? That's not just poor form. It's idiotic. The new CEO wants to make his mark, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Restructuring is standard practice. There's nothing standard about removing the person who built your investor relationships 2 months before a funding round. She shook her head. Especially not when that person has a standing golf game with Charles Denham. I felt a flicker of surprise. "You know about our Thursday games?" "Everyone knows, Harriet. The 3 of us control nearly $200 million of Calridge's investment capital." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. What they might not know is that Charles was already nervous about this new CEO. He thought Damon was too aggressive, too focused on quick returns rather than sustainable growth. I sipped my drink, saying nothing. "Charles called me after your last golf game," Eleanor continued. "He asked what I thought about moving some of our investments. He wasn't comfortable with the direction Damon was taking things." This was news to me. Charles had been loyally with Calridge for 18 years. If he was considering moving his funds, the situation was worse than I'd realized. "And what did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him as long as you were there to keep things grounded, I wasn't worried." She gave me a pointed look. "That was last week. The situation has clearly changed." The waiter arrived with our salads, giving me a moment to process this information. I'd known my departure would cause some waves, but I hadn't realized just how precarious Damon's position already was with our key investors. "I don't want anyone making decisions based on what happened to me," I said finally. "I've had a good career. I was nearly finished anyway." Eleanor studied me over the rim of her glass. Always the professional, Harriet. Always putting the firm first. She set down her drink. "But answer me this. Do you think Calridge is in good hands under Damon Shore?" The question hung between us, heavy with implication. For 32 years, I had been unfailingly loyal to Calridge. I had defended every decision, supported every leader, and put the firm's interests above my own time and again. But now, for the first time, I was on the outside. And from the outside, I could see clearly what I had been too close to notice before. "No," I said quietly. "I don't think it is." I was in my garden the next morning when my phone rang. Thomas was watching me from the kitchen window as I knelt among my roses, methodically removing the weeds that had sprouted during my long hours at the office. Gardening had always been my therapy, and today I needed it more than ever. The caller ID showed it was Jeffrey Williams from Trevanta Corp., the third member of our regular golf foursome. I brushed soil from my hands before answering. "Good morning, Jeffrey," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "If you're calling about golf today, I'm afraid I need to cancel." "I already know, Harriet," he replied, his normally jovial voice unusually somber. "Charles called me last night. We're both skipping golf today, too." I sighed, sitting back on my heels. News traveled fast in our circles. "I was going to tell you both today. I didn't want to make a fuss. Getting fired 2 months before retirement after 32 years of service deserves at least a small fuss," Jeffrey said. "Charles is livid. He's been calling board members since 5 a.m. That made me sit up straight. "Jeffrey, please tell Charles not to do anything rash on my account. These things happen in business. Companies restructure." "This isn't about you, Harriet. Not entirely." Jeffrey paused. "We've all been concerned about Damon's strategy. His presentation last month about moving away from relationship-based investments into more algorithm-driven decisions raised red flags. Your firing just confirms our fears about his judgment." My phone beeped with another incoming call. This one from Charles himself. "Jeffrey, I need to take this. Charles is calling." "Of course. But Harriet? You should know that Trevanta is reassessing our position with Calridge. I'll be in touch." My stomach tightened as I switched calls. "Good morning, Charles." "There's nothing good about it," Charles barked, bypassing any greeting. "I just got off the phone with Philip Peterson." Philip was the chairman of Calridge's board, and Charles's tone told me the conversation hadn't gone well. "Charles, whatever you're thinking of doing..." "It's done, Harriet. I informed Philip that Marion Bay is pulling out of the upcoming funding round, effective immediately." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words. Marion Bay's commitment to the funding round was nearly $80 million, money that Calridge was counting on to launch their expansion into new markets. "You didn't need to do that," I said quietly. "Yes, I did." Charles was uncharacteristically emotional. "It's not just about your firing, though that was unconscionable. It's what it represents. Damon Shore has been systematically dismantling everything that made Calridge worth investing in. He's replaced relationship managers with fresh MBAs who don't know our names. He's implemented arbitrary new fee structures. And now he's fired the one person who's kept our confidence through 3 decades. I hadn't realized things had deteriorated so quickly in the 6 weeks since Damon had taken over. I'd been so focused on preparing for my retirement that I'd missed the broader changes happening around me. "The board's in emergency session now," Charles continued. "Eleanor called me this morning. Zentron's pulling their $40 million too. That was $120 million, vanishing in less than 24 hours. Add Trevanta's likely withdrawal, and the total approached $180 million. "I never wanted this," I said, feeling slightly sick. "I know you didn't. That's why we trust you." Charles's voice softened. "The board wants to meet with you. Today, if possible." "Meet with me? Whatever for?" "To fix this mess, Harriet. To save their company." He paused. "You have more power right now than you realize. The question is, what do you want to do with it?" I looked down at my garden, at the roses I'd so carefully tended over the years, pruning away the dead branches to let the healthy ones flourish. Sometimes, cutting back was necessary for growth, but it had to be done with care and understanding. Damon Shore had taken a chainsaw to what required pruning shears. "I'll meet with them," I said finally, "but I make no promises about what comes after." The Calridge boardroom felt different from the other side of the table. For decades, I'd sat alongside management, presenting reports, explaining strategies, and defending decisions. Now I was the outsider, facing a row of anxious faces, the 9 members of Calridge's board of directors. Philip Peterson sat at the center, his normally composed expression strained. To his right was Victoria Coleman, who had hired me 32 years ago. To his left, several newer board members I knew primarily through quarterly meetings. Damon Shore was conspicuously absent. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Harriet," Philip began. "I want to start by saying that what happened yesterday was not a board-approved decision. We were informed after the fact." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral despite the small flare of vindication I felt. "I appreciate that clarification, Philip. How can I help you today?" Victoria leaned forward. "We're in a crisis, Harriet. Charles Denham has pulled Marion Bay's entire investment from our upcoming funding round. Eleanor Blackwood has done the same with Zentron Global. Jeffrey Williams is meeting with Trevanta's board this afternoon, but we expect the same result." "I've heard," I said simply. "In total, we're looking at a shortfall of $180 million, Philip continued. "Without that funding, our expansion plans collapse. We'll need to cut departments. Projects will be canceled. People will lose jobs." "People already have," I pointed out quietly. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. "We made a mistake," Victoria said finally. "We were so focused on bringing in new blood, on modernizing, that we forgot what makes Calridge work, the relationships that you and others have built over decades." Philip nodded. "Damon Shore has been placed on administrative leave pending review, effective immediately." This surprised me. Moving this quickly against a CEO they'd hired only 6 weeks ago was unprecedented. The situation was even more dire than I'd realized. "What exactly do you want from me?" I asked. Victoria and Philip exchanged glances. "We'd like you to reach out to Charles, Eleanor, and Jeffrey," Philip said, "to see if they would reconsider their positions if certain changes were made at Calridge." "What changes?" "A reversal of Damon's restructuring, for one," Victoria said. "Reinstatement of the senior relationship managers he let go. A formal apology to you, with full benefits through your originally planned retirement date, plus appropriate compensation for the distress caused." I considered this. It was a generous offer, more than generous. But something still felt off. "And who would lead Calridge while you search for a new CEO?" I asked. Another uncomfortable silence. "We were hoping," Philip said carefully, "that you might consider staying on. Not as CEO necessarily, but in an executive role that would reassure our investors during the transition." I sat back, genuinely surprised. I was transitioning out. I was ready to retire. "We know." Victoria's voice was gentle. "And we would understand completely if you declined. But Harriet, there's no one else our investors trust the way they trust you." I thought about my team, the people who had been left rudderless by Damon's hasty restructuring. I thought about the projects that would collapse without the funding round. I thought about Laura, who had cried when security walked me out. But I also thought about my garden, about the travel plans Thomas and I had made, about the 32 years I had already given to Calridge. "I need time to think," I said finally. "And I need to speak with Charles, Eleanor, and Jeffrey first. Not as your emissary, but as someone who cares about them and their investments. I need to understand exactly what their concerns are beyond my situation." "Of course," Philip said quickly. "Take whatever time you need." As I stood to leave, Victoria followed me to the door. "For what it's worth, Harriet, I fought against your dismissal when I heard. We all did, but by then, it was already done. I studied her face, lined now with age and worry, but still the same woman who had taken a chance on me all those years ago. I believe you, I said. But good intentions don't undo damage once it's done. You all approved hiring Damon. You gave him the authority to make these changes. The consequences of that decision don't disappear with an apology. As I walked out of the Calridge building for the second time in 24 hours, I realized I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Free. Charles, Eleanor, and Jeffrey agreed to meet me at my home that evening. It felt strange to host them in my living room rather than on the golf course or in a restaurant, but there was something appropriate about the setting. This was personal now. I don't care what they offered you, Charles said bluntly after I'd explained the board's proposal. I'm not putting another cent into Calridge with Damon Shore at the helm. They've put him on administrative leave, I reminded him. He's essentially fired. Administrative leave can end, Eleanor pointed out. Unless there's a permanent change in leadership, I can't justify recommending Zentren reinvest either. Jeffrey nodded in agreement. The board enabled his decisions. They might do the same with the next CEO they hire. I served coffee as we talked, feeling oddly like a mediator rather than a participant. The board is asking me to stay on in an executive role during the transition, I said, to help rebuild investor confidence. All three looked at me with surprise. Would you consider it? Jeffrey asked. I sighed. I don't know. I was ready to retire. Thomas and I have plans. Plans can be delayed, Charles said, then caught himself. Though you certainly don't owe Calridge anything after how they treated you. It's not about what I owe Calridge, I said slowly. It's about the people who work there, the projects that will collapse without this funding, the clients who depend on our services. Eleanor watched me with knowing eyes. You've always put others first, Harriet, but maybe this time you should put yourself first. What do you mean? She set down her coffee cup deliberately. If you were to consider staying, it should be on your terms. Not as a figurehead to reassure investors while they find another young hotshot to replace Damon, but in a real position of authority. Charles's eyes lit up. Eleanor's right. If they want you back, they should make you CEO. CEO? I nearly choked on my coffee. That's not what It's exactly what they need, Jeffrey cut in. Someone who understands that investment isn't just about algorithms and quick profits. Someone who values relationships and long-term growth. Someone like you, Eleanor finished. I sat back, genuinely stunned. I'm 64 years old. I was planning to retire. Age brings wisdom, Charles said, something sorely lacking in their recent decisions. As my three friends continued to build their case, I found myself thinking about what a Calridge under my leadership might look like. The changes I would make, the culture I would restore, the innovations I would keep from Damon's brief tenure while discarding the harmful elements. It was an intoxicating vision. I don't know, I said again, but with less certainty. Eleanor reached over and took my hand. Just promise us you won't sell yourself short. Whatever you decide to do, retire as planned, stay on temporarily, or take the helm, do it because it's what you want, not because you feel obligated. After they left, I found Thomas in his study. He'd given us privacy for our meeting, understanding its importance. What will you do? He asked, looking up from his book. I sat beside him, suddenly exhausted. I don't know. What do you think I should do? He closed his book thoughtfully. I think you should do whatever will let you sleep peacefully at night. If that means walking away, we'll go to Italy as planned. If it means staying to fix what's broken, we'll delay Italy. He smiled. Italy's been there for thousands of years. It can wait a little longer. I leaned against his shoulder, grateful for his understanding. The board's desperate. I could ask for anything. Then ask for what you're worth, he said simply. Not a penny less. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I realized what I wanted to ask for. It wasn't just about position or compensation. It was about legacy and principles and setting things right. If Calridge wanted me back, they would need to understand exactly what they had almost lost and what they needed to change to keep it from happening again. The following morning, I arrived at Calridge Equity Partners for my meeting with the board on my own terms. The security guards nodded respectfully, no longer watching me as if I might steal office supplies. Word had gotten around. I wore my best suit, dove gray with a subtle blue pinstripe, and carried the leather portfolio Thomas had given me for our 30th anniversary. I looked every inch the executive I had always been, regardless of titles. The board was waiting, the tension in the room palpable. Philip's assistant had called late the previous night, informing me that they were prepared to offer me the position of interim CEO, with the possibility of removing interim after 6 months. It was a significant offer, but it wasn't what I wanted. "Good morning," I said as I took my seat. All 9 board members responded with a chorus of greetings, their eagerness almost palpable. "Harriet, we've considered your value to this company very carefully," Philip began. "We'd like to offer you the position of interim CEO, with a review in 6 months for a permanent appointment. Full executive compensation, of course." I nodded, taking a moment before responding. "I appreciate the offer, Philip, but I have a counter-proposal." I opened my portfolio and slid a document across the table, a single sheet of paper outlining my terms. Philip and Victoria leaned forward to read it together, their expressions shifting from hopeful to surprised. "You don't want to be CEO," Victoria said, looking up. "No," I confirmed. "I want to be Chief Relationship Officer, a new C-suite position with full board voting rights and authority over all client-facing operations." "And you want this position created permanently in the company charter," Philip added, still reading. "Not just for you, but as an ongoing role." "Yes. The position would prioritize relationship building and maintenance over short-term profits, a balance to the more aggressive growth strategies." "And in return?" Victoria asked, though the answer was already on the page. "In return, I will personally reach out to Charles, Eleanor, and Jeffrey, as well as our other major investors, and ask them to reinstate their funding commitments. I will also agree to stay for 1 year, long enough to establish the position and train my successor." The board members exchanged glances, a silent conversation happening across the table. "And Damon?" Philip asked finally. "That's for the board to decide," I said. "But I would recommend finding him a role that utilizes his strengths without giving him unrestricted authority over client relationships." 3 days later, I stood at the podium in Cowridge's largest conference room, addressing a packed audience of employees, board members, and, most importantly, investors. Charles, Eleanor, and Jeffrey sat in the front row alongside representatives from a dozen other investment firms. "Change is inevitable in any organization," I said, my voice steady and clear. "But how we manage that change determines whether we grow stronger or lose what makes us special." I outlined the new vision for Calridge, a hybrid approach that embraced technological innovation while preserving the human relationships that had built our reputation. I introduced the new position of Chief Relationship Officer and explained its role in ensuring that future decisions balanced growth with stability. "I'm pleased to announce that our funding round has been fully reinstated," I continued, to audible sighs of relief from the staff. "In fact, it has been oversubscribed by an additional $20 million, a testament to our investors' renewed confidence." From the corner of my eye, I could see Damon Shore standing at the back of the room. As promised, the board had found a role that suited his talents: head of innovation strategy, reporting directly to the board rather than having autonomous authority. His expression was unreadable, but he nodded slightly when our eyes met. He was young. He would learn. When the announcement concluded, Charles approached me, hand extended. "Beautifully played, Harriet. You've secured your legacy without sacrificing your principles." Or my retirement plans, I added with a smile. Just delayed by a year. Eleanor joined us, champagne flute in hand. To the new Chief Relationship Officer, she said, raising her glass, may your successor uphold your standards. They will, I assured her. I'll make certain of it. As I looked around the room at the relieved faces of my colleagues, I felt a deep satisfaction. Not the vindictive pleasure of revenge, but the quieter, more enduring satisfaction of restoration, of setting things right. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made threats. I had simply left with the same grace I had led with, and let the people who truly knew my worth do the rest. What I hadn't expected was how much stronger I would return, having finally recognized that worth myself. 1 year later, I retired as planned, handing the role of Chief Relationship Officer to Laura, my former assistant of 12 years, who understood better than anyone the importance of human connection in a world increasingly driven by algorithms. Thomas and I finally took our trip to Italy, and I found I could enjoy the vineyards and museums completely free of worry. The quarterly reports showed Calridge was thriving under its new balanced approach, with record client retention and steady, sustainable growth. In the end, my greatest revenge wasn't bringing down the man who had dismissed me so carelessly. It was building something more lasting than he ever could have, something that would continue long after both of us had moved on.